Hey everybody, welcome back to the Calibrate Tools and DIY channel. I am the tool man. Okay. Hope everybody's doing okay, guys. Gonna jump on a pretty interesting topic tonight. I always say it's not gonna be that long. I promise you it's not gonna be that long, but I found this topic very interesting. And so I would like to forewarn you that I will be jumping around a little bit in the topic, but it's all related. So the title of this live is They Found More Reasons to Build Concrete Jungles. Now, what is a concrete jungle, guys? It's a city, right? Like if you think of New York, if you think of, I guess, there's levels to it. The more surface area that's covered with skyscrapers and buildings and concrete everywhere, that's what you would consider a concrete jungle. I'm a city dude. I never really, I'm not a farm. I didn't grow up on a farm or anything like that. I didn't grow up in a rural area. Pretty much in the city. Okay, except for the formative years of my life, where I was, on an island from the age of one to 10. But even then, that was not as inundated with cement and concrete, but it was definitely there. So when I moved here as a young man to the States, if you didn't know that, um, you know, I pretty much grew up in the States in cities. All right, so I love the city. I'm not trying to knock the city, but there are drawbacks to living in the city, and we're going to talk about it. And and we're going to talk about some reasons why they may even be increasing the city, right? Increasing building these cities. Hey, Chantel, how you doing? Shalom to you. All right, glad to see you come in. Stop by. All right, so one of the reasons that city living is not as healthy as you think it is. Let's talk about that. For one, they have what's called heat islands in cities, right? Concrete and asphalt, right? They absorb a lot of heat and they also radiate a lot of heat, and that makes cities significantly hotter than, say, if you lived out in a rural area or out in the woods or on a farm or something like that. So you're living in a hotter area right off the jump, okay? And that's not good, right? Even though you don't know it. Loss of green space, trees and vegetation and stuff like that. Um, they're not really existing in cities like that, right? I know it's that varies from city to city, but for the most part, the green space is gone. Okay, so what that does is reduces the air quality. Um, there's no wildlife, and there's no trees to cool things off, absorb the CO2 and all that stuff. There's none of that there. So that's two strikes against living in cities. Then they have what's called water runoff problems. Concrete doesn't absorb water. So rain runs off into the storm drains instead of soaking into the ground and nourishing the ground. So now you have a risk of flooding, and there's no place to absorb the water, right? So that's three strikes against living in the city. Next one is biodiversity loss, right? So basically, what that means is eliminates habitats for plants, insects, birds, and other urban wildlife. So now you got to go to the zoo, or you got to go to a special area where they have wildlife, right? Maybe certain parks. Think of like Central Park in New York City, or any other major park where you have habitats where plants and birds and all that stuff can thrive, right? So that's limited in cities. So that's four strikes against living in the city, right? That's just on the environmental side. Now, what about the psychological side, or the what about that? You have, okay. It's been The studies have shown that lack of exposure to nature actually increases your stress levels, right? You got more anxiety. Everybody's running around trying to chase that dollar, right? Because prices are high and all that stuff. So everybody's running around like ants in this little, I guess you could look at the city like an ant farm, right? And you got everybody running around trying to get what they can get. And then they run back into their apartment complexes or their houses out in the burbs. And, it's just, it's really not conducive to uh, a healthy mental state. Right now, if you're doing things like active things in your life, like meditating or going to church and all that stuff, that will help. But just the environment of the city itself and what it demands of you produces that stress and anxiety, right? You got to deal with traffic. I live in LA and the traffic is like crazy out here, right? And you probably could say the same thing for where you live. But all these things contribute to stress levels, right? Which once again reduces your a healthy lifestyle, right? Air quality, right? I live in California, Southern California to be exact, and I remember when I first got out here, looking at the smog that covered the city, right? And I was like, man, what did I do? I'm immersed in this smog because you can actually see the layer of smog blanketing the city, right? And then above that, you have these clear skies, and you see, So I was like, man, we're breathing this in, we're eating, sleeping, and breathing this in, and that really wasn't a really pleasing thought, right? But it is what it is. I'm still here. So physical health, right? Extreme heat. Once again, I described how living in cities, right? Now, this is not as where I am. It's not as much of an urban jungle. I mean, concrete jungle like New York City, but it's still, nonetheless, it's still a concrete jungle of sorts. That all that heat from that comes up is once again, it affects your health, right? If your body temperature is increased more than it should be naturally, then that's going to have adverse effects on your health, even though it may be a slow cooking, a slow burn. That's pretty much what's happening. That's why it's very important to get out in nature, right? Get away from the cities for a while. It's just overall better for you, mentally, physically, and all of that, right? But the lack of recreational areas, I know you have your parks and this and that. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you just got to get away. Because when you go to a park, a lot of these parks are just mini concrete slabs in the middle of a city, right? So that doesn't necessarily help either. So it's really not like, it's not as natural as it could be. It's like a manufactured area for people to go and pretend like they're getting away from their already stressful lives living in a city. Living in a city can also make you feel isolated, right? It can make you feel isolated, even though everybody's all compact and living together. It can be very impersonal. Like, you hear people walking the streets of New York City or Chicago saying, man, everybody, I'm in the middle of all these people, yet nobody looks at me or nobody says anything to me, or everybody's mean, because that's what the city produces, right? Everybody becomes this other person, right? It's almost like it's like survival of the fittest in a sense, right? So because of the lack of community, that also has a psychological effect on a larger scale, on a social scale. And that's why certain cities have they have a frequency to it, right? Or a feel to it, right? Somebody may describe, people in LA, they're so, plastic and, materialistic. People in New York are cold and just, always trying to hustle and get something out of you, that kind of thing, right? So, it's interesting, the social dynamics of how putting people in a certain area, concentrated area, where it's it's a concrete jungle, what it produces, right? Think of people that live out in the country, right? You always hear about people going to the South or out in some rural area, and they're so friendly. When they drive by, they wave to you and all that stuff, because it could be the fact that they're not living in a concrete jungle. A lot of them live on large plots of land with animals and nature and all this stuff around, so their overall well-being is much more agreeable. So people may seem more friendly, right? And so that's some of the negatives of living in a city. And I'm sure you could think of some positive things too, but that's not necessarily what this live is about. So the solution to that is maybe to stop building cities, right, all over the place, and design a more eco-friendly, green type of infrastructure, right, where people feel more at one with other people, at one with the earth, at one with nature. And I'm not trying to sound all green and stuff. Um, but when you think of the when you think of life and living and going to work and for hours on end just to get a check, and just when just to come home and do it all over again, and come home and do it all over again in a city dealing with all this stuff, when you think of the bigger picture, you're like, man, what am I doing here? Right? I deserve a little more peace in my life to really enjoy life. And maybe I want to get away from this city. Maybe I want to move and get a house out in get a farm somewhere, and just kind of just relax a little bit and be able to breathe, right? Instead of running around like in this rat race that we're in. And I think that's what we should do. But they're finding more reasons, I think, to build cities in the name of what I'm actually talking about, in the name of being green, right? It's funny how that works, and I'm going to get into it right now, right? Okay, so let's see here. So they've been doing research, guys. They've been doing research on cement. That's right, cement, the glue that holds in or that binds concrete and all this other stuff together, the mortar. And they found they already knew this, but they found that carbon dioxide it can be stored in cement. Matter of fact, cement actually absorbs carbon dioxide and it stores millions of tons a year into the cement, right? In concrete jungles, right? So what are the implications of that? What are the implications of that? Basically, cities like New York, Chicago, LA, Miami, or any major city where the surface area is probably 80% concrete, though they're now considered carbon sinks, right? So if you are a person that's worried about emissions, or if you're a government, if you're a country, and you're trying to abide by the emissions laws, and you come across this information that carbon dioxide is actually stored in concrete, guess what that's going to do? Everything is going to elicit a political response, right? People are going to start thinking, oh man, maybe I need to build more concrete, right? Maybe I need to build more cities. Maybe I need to build more prisons. Maybe I need to build more, whatever, right? In the name of reducing emissions. And it's interesting, the chemistry behind all of this, because cement does store a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. Let's read here. The world's most common construction material has a secret. Cement, the glue that holds concrete together, gradually breathes in and stores millions of tons of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the air over the lifetimes of buildings and infrastructure. Okay, this was a study done at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it's called carbon uptake. That's what the process is called, right? Carbon is being absorbed into into cement, right? And by the way, if you don't know the difference between cement and concrete, let me explain. Cement is the powder, and when you mix it up, it's a paste, right? But once it hardens, then it becomes concrete. Okay, so that's the quick and dirty explanation of it. Nonetheless, whether it's a paste or whether it's or not, or whether it's hardened, CO2 is absorbed into it, right? It absorbs the stuff. It binds to the molecules in the cement, and it gets trapped in there, right? And it's called calcium carbonate or limestone. I'm sure you guys have heard of limestone. So, like I said, they've known about this process for a long time, right? I think probably for decades they've known about this. But what they haven't really got a grasp on is the magnitude of this process, and that's what they're studying now to see on a national level how much of this CO2 is being stored, right? So that's going to be probably a very big number. And then I can only deduce from there that they're going to take that knowledge, right? Once they do all the research and all crunch all the numbers and all that stuff. They're going to say, okay, well, in the name of a greener world, right? In the name of reducing, what do they call it? The global emissions or greenhouse gases, we're going to build this amount of 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 concrete buildings in in a surface area to capture carbon from the atmosphere, so you can be live in a healthier environment, right? It's almost like solar panels, right? I think that's kind of like a bad analogy, but it's the same thing. Solar panels, they absorb sunlight and they produce electricity, right? But I don't think solar panels have as much of a negative effect on people than living in a concrete jungle does. So I found that very interesting, guys. And I started, just like I said, thinking ahead and saying, okay, what are they going to do with this information, right? After they do all the research and decide what they're going to do, it's going to come before a panel of experts or power players who make the decisions, and they're going to say they're going to do this or that, right? Because they gotta comply with the emissions laws. I don't know what the global emissions laws are. I know climate change has been a big issue for the last few, I don't know, 10 years or so. And so, they're probably going to use this information and twist it and say, okay, look, you guys want to reduce the carbon emissions. Okay, so we won't poke a hole into the atmosphere. Well, we're just going to have to. Part of that is how we can help is build more buildings, right? And who knows what that's going to entail, right? But one thing about it is they do have some valid reasons to do it, because once that CO2 is absorbed in the concrete, it's actually been known to make the concrete stronger, right? And so they can use that knowledge in their favor as well, right? I think the only drawback to it is that the corrosive aspects of the CO2 is increased, right? So if you have rebar or something, which most buildings do, right, to reinforce the concrete, to have rebar and all that stuff in there, that process can corrode things quicker. So I don't know what they're going to do about that part, but I'm sure they'll find a way around that, right? Maybe it evens out, right? The corrosive aspects versus the strength increasing aspects of it. Maybe it all equals out. But very interesting, guys. I know it's probably the last thing you guys are thinking about, but every now and then I throw some things at you to make you think ahead at what the future is bringing. All right, so let's see here. What else can we discuss around this topic here? Let's see here. Let's see. So some ongoing efforts to force carbonation in concrete involve artificially increasing the amount of CO2 gas present during the early stage hydration of concrete. This process is known as forced carbonation. It aims to accelerate the carbonation reaction and its associated benefits. What do they do with CO2, guys? I mean, I was doing the research on that, and they actually capture CO2 emissions, and there are two ways to get rid of that. This CO2 that they capture, they can release it into the atmosphere, which is okay. What's the reason you captured it in the first place? Just to release it. Or what they can do to the CO2 gas is they can compress it into a liquid and then take that liquid and inject it deep into the earth, right? And I don't know the ramifications of doing that. I haven't studied too much about that, but that's one way of doing that, is injecting that stuff into the earth. But now that they have found out that, hey, listen, this waste product called CO2, right? We can now commodify it, right? If it's infused into concrete, right? Concrete captures it. Then what we can do is we can inject it into the concrete, right? And we can sell it that can be a selling point to people who are more environmentally conscious and say, listen, this is a carbon negative product here. Your house is built, you actually have a green building. It's this is a specialized concrete where we injected it with CO2, right? And so you can now say your house is green because it captured the CO2 from the atmosphere. So it's all kinds of ways people can think of to market this product, right? Knowing that it can hold CO2, market a house. Matter of fact, the value of your house may go up by saying, listen, it's a CO2 infused house. Different things people can do with this knowledge, right? So yeah, it's very interesting, this discovery. But my only thing with this, and like I started off with this live, is that there are going to be those who are just going to use this knowledge for more nefarious reasons, right? To make an excuse for building more concrete jungles, right? If you live in the inner city, you know what a concrete jungle is, right? You're not really reaping the benefits of living in a high rise and all that stuff. You're living in you are the heat sink, right? All the stuff that I described before. Most inner city kids don't get out to parks. They don't travel, right? They're stuck in that concrete jungle for a long time, for most of their young lives, right? Maybe up to the age of 18 or even longer if they make it out of there, right? So I'm not a proponent of that. So not trying to be cynical. That's the first thing that came up to my mind when I came across this information. Tell me what you think about it. But once again, it can be, hey, Reno, how you doing? Reno Stubbs in the house. Chantel says, the truth is that the Netherlands, I'm sorry, I thought you said Netherlands. She said that the Neanderthals only think about money and will sacrifice nature for their wealth, which is their God. Yeah, unfortunately, that's true, Chantel. And Chantel's pretty blunt about that. And I could appreciate that about her. She tells it like it is. But yeah, they're going to be those bad actors, in the world who are definitely going to take this information to further their nefarious, like I said, nefarious agenda. And so, but the chemistry is there. Chemistry doesn't lie, right? So, well, people can lie about the chemistry, but nature is nature. Chemistry is chemistry. Chemistry is chemistry, and the CO2 does get absorbed in cement. Okay, which is, I thought it was very interesting too, as a store of these emissions. So you can either use this information for the good or use it for the not so good. And yeah, I thought I'd bring that to you guys. And I'm sure like some people are like, man, whatever. You know what I'm saying? But I really think it's important that we broaden our horizons when it comes to studying knowledge that is not necessarily entertainment based or anything like that, because it stimulates our critical thinking faculties, and it can only prepare us for what you're going to get hit with out there in the world, right? This is not a kumbaya world as much as people want it to be. But there are agendas out there that are being worked on right as I speak, right? And so we have to be prepared and not be surprised, right? So I am a staunch supporter of anybody that is into homesteading, going out there and getting their own land and building sustainable areas for their communities, their families, right? Because when you really think about it, you were actually forced to be in a concrete jungle, right? Or somebody brought you there and raised you up as a child into a young adult in these concrete jungles, and you think this is the end all be all. This is the pinnacle of civilization, when they have all kinds of alternative ways of living, right? Who said you had to live in a square building with right angles everywhere. Matter of fact, I think if you live, I think there's information about living in spheres, right? Round, more rounded structures, because energy kind of it doesn't just bounce off corners; it flows smoothly around curved surfaces. And if you think about a curved surface, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, anything curved is actually more optimal. Think about the wheel, right? And how it's transformed or revolutionized transportation, right? Think about anything that revolves. The universe revolves, right? We circle a big orb in the middle of the solar system called the sun, right? Our planet is an orb itself, and all the other planets are orbs. So that's nature itself tells you about curvature and how that's the optimal shape. But yet we live in these square buildings, and that wasn't our choice. If you look at some of the indigenous populations, they lived in more rounded. Like even if you talk about they lived in huts and stuff. Well, the hut was rounded, right? If you look at a teepee, that's round, right? So you can take that into you can take that and run with that. But yeah, it's interesting that these institutions of higher learning, quote unquote, are discovering these things and what they're going to do with them. Let's see what they're going to do with it. What kind of laws they're going to pass, how that's going to affect building things in the future, and for the future of construction and building, right? Based on this information. Anyway, guys, that's it for tonight. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks, Chantel. Thanks, Reno. Appreciate you. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't forget, check out calibrate.com. The holidays are coming up. Go grab something, support the channel. And I'll see you guys in the next one.